Okay, good morning, Isabel. Thank you for joining. Good morning, Shira. Good morning, Steve. Good morning, Maddie. Okay, so we're going to be learning chapter 18 of Tanya. This is huge. This is big. It's going to be a very special embarking on a new section of Tanya that's really heading in a specific direction. Again, we're using it from the practical Tanya. Today's class is going to be a chunk of it. Probably all of it, we'll see how it goes, is going to be outside of the text. I'm going to try to give an overview of where Tanya is heading. And of course, feel free to ask any questions as we go through it, but it should be a very, it should be very meaningful in seeing what Tanya wants from us at this point. So just to summarize where we're holding chapter 18, what we know so far in Tanya, one of the main agendas, I'm not going to give a full review. I did that last week. You can watch the recording. It's on jewishnevada.com/virtual. You can see all the Tanya class recordings. But what we know is chapter 12 introduced the powerful concept of Tanya called impulse control. And the point of it was, don't worry so much about what you're feeling inside, even if the feeling inside doesn't seem to be in the right place, but you can still control yourself. You can still do the right thing because the mind controls the heart. Over time, it could be a little tough, like that elastic band. The drawback of this mind ruling the heart is that it's stressful. It's lacking any emotional consistency. And as a result, over time, it could be exhausting and it could really get to you. So what chapter 16 and 17 did, it was, let's focus, let's work a little bit also on changing our insides, not just our behavior, the outside, which was chapter 12, the Beinani. Let's also, for the Beinani, work a little bit on getting our emotions in line. And to get our emotions in line, what Chabad stands for is you have to get your mind. If you meditate on something, if you think about something, it'll get your emotions on board. So to get your emotions in line, you have to work on some meditations. But in truth, it takes a lifetime to work on that, to get the right mindset over and over again. It takes consistency. It takes a certain regimen and a certain focus. To do that, while the Alter Rebbe mentions it in chapter 16 and 17, it takes sometimes quite a while to achieve this. And as a result, the Alter Rebbe puts that perspective, puts that advice on the side for now. Chapter 16 and 17 was only 2 chapters. But what the Alter Rebbe explains over there is something that takes a lifetime to implement. A constant focus of the mind to inspire the heart, to then also get our emotions in and our behavior in the right place. But that's a longer way. While it's important, it takes a while to implement it and for it to have an impact and effect. What chapter 18 now, through chapter 25, so 7 chapters of Tanya now, it's going to go in a different direction, and it's going to give you a shorter way to get results. The point is going to be the same. Let's get ourselves emotionally connected, involved. But the first way, the suggestion was, let's get our mind involved. And from the mind, it'll affect the heart. But that's going to take a lot of meditations, and that's going to take a while to implement. So what the Alter Rebbe does now in chapter 18, just to see the roadmap, this is a new advice that's going to work right away. You know, like you see the signs wherever you go, in malls or in stores, in case of emergency, break the glass here. So that's where we're holding now, where we need a solution right now. And we need a solution that is easy to implement. So the meditation one will take a while, and it takes work, focus, dedication, and loyalty. Whereas what we're going to be advising now from the Alter Rebbe in chapter 18 through 25, it's going to be a quicker fix, but it's not going to be, we'll see how it goes. All right, so it'll take 7, 8 chapters to explain how this new agenda works, how this new emergency fix, Band-Aid, will work. Okay, so what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to give a view of the next 7, 8 chapters of Tanya to try to see where the Alter Rebbe is coming from. What's the plan? What's his overall advice? And this will actually clarify in chapter 18. If you remember, we've been quoting a verse that the Alter Rebbe brings in the index page, where the verse says that this thing, the Torah and mitzvahs, is very near to you, in your mouth, in your heart, so that you can do it. So what we've been focusing on in 16 and 17 is the heart part, the part that our heart could be involved. How? So we explained, to get the heart involved, it has to start with the mind. But there's another part of the verse that the verse says this is very near to you. It's easy to do, very easy. In Hebrew, the word is karov me'od. It's very near. So what we're going to try to explain is, how is this very near to you? So the meditation part is not that very near, because that's something you have to develop, something you have to focus and meditate on and train yourself toward. But the very near that the Torah refers to is actually about not creating or developing anything new. It's going to be about finding something that already exists within you, that you don't need to reach out. You just have to dig inside and you'll find the proper tools needed. And that's why it's very near. So again, when the Torah says that this thing, the Torah, is very near to you so that you can do it in your heart and in your mouth, what is very near? The meditation is not. That's something you have to develop, something you have to train yourself. What is going to be very near is what we're about to advise in chapter 18, which is to find, and here it goes, to find a hidden love, a latent love that you naturally possess. A love for God that is in your simple DNA, that you didn't have to earn or work toward, like a meditation is something you have to work toward. This is something that you already have. You just have to find it. You just have to dig a little, but it's there. In Hebrew, it's called an ahava mesuteret, which means a hidden love. It's not even something that we have to figure out, do we have it or not? It's automatic in our DNA. Just from being Jewish, you have this incredible treasure that was bequeathed to us from our ancestors, from Abraham, and the patriarchs, that they had this love for God. And that is something that they passed down. It's automatic. It's like an inheritance. Automatically, an inheritance belongs to the children of the parents. So it's something that's hardwired within us. Again, what is hardwired? This love that is already within us, a love for God that is natural. It's there. Just, it's hidden. The goal will be to bring it out. And that's going to be what the main discussion is over the next few chapters, is how to bring this out. Because if you would just be able to trigger this love, you would be on fire. Your emotions would be fully on board to doing the right thing. Your behavior will be so easily doing the right thing because your emotions are going to be fully involved. So again, in chapter 16 and 17, we were explaining how to get the emotions involved by getting the mind, because it starts with the mind and it develops a feeling. What we're doing now is explaining how you don't have to work on the mind. A quicker fix is to realize the love you already possess. And if you just awaken that love, your feelings toward God will be so strong. And therefore your behavior will automatically be in the right place. It won't be any pulling, it would be automatic to do the right thing. So just to give a guide map, a roadmap of how this is happening, is in chapter 18, the Alter Rebbe introduces that we have this hidden love within. In chapter 19, the Alter Rebbe proves how we have this love. Besides for the fact that it was bequeathed us, the Alter Rebbe says, here's something novel about Judaism. In all religions, any religious person will hopefully be ready to stand up for their religion. In the face of threat, they would say, I'm faithful to this. This is what I believe in. I'm on board, no matter what. And over history, we've seen many Jews who were killed simply for being Jewish. But that is not novel to Judaism. Anyone who believes in their faith and follows and is religious will be on boards toward it. What's novel in Judaism is that it's not the religious person, the one giving up their life only. Any single Jew will be ready to give up their life for the sake of their Judaism. I've shared many stories. Well, when in the past, and maybe I'll share another one, but the fact is that religious or not, whether you've attended synagogue or not, whether you've practiced or grew up religious or not, when a Jew feels threatened for his very Judaism, something inside of him just wakes up. When a person says, I want you to bow down to this idol, renounce your Judaism, or I will kill you, a Jew will say, I'm not bowing to that idol. I'm not disconnecting myself from my God. Not a great, but a sad example of this is Daniel Pearl. Some of you, he was a journalist, I think for the Washington Post, and he was kidnapped in 2001, I think, by Pakistani terrorists, and his last words, he held up the newspaper that showed today's date, and he says, my father is Jewish, my mother is Jewish, and I am Jewish. Now, he wasn't a practicing Jew. He was intermarried, and it's not important to hear about his past life, but when it came down to it, his last words he said was, I'm Jewish, even though he wasn't religious at all. And I could tell you numerous stories. When a person feels threatened of their very Judaism, they're not ready to disconnect themselves from God. So while people have their level of Judaism that they want to practice, whether religious or not, but when they feel that they would be severing their connection with God, they would never sever that. So again, just to explain, we have someone in our community and we're very close with, and he for a while he professed himself as atheist, and that's not important, but like he doesn't wear a big Star of David. He's just who he is. But when he heard someone mocking the Jews, he went up to the guy, and he's not a fighter type of guy, but he held him and he says, you never say that about my people. And he was someone who wasn't practicing. He was someone, I don't even know how he identified as Jewish, but it's something that shook him to the core. We have a person we know who's a building inspector. Like they do bank inspections. No, sorry, not bank. They do building inspections. And when he was inspecting a home, the home I think was owned by Jews, and the buyer who hired the inspector was not a Jew. Didn't know that the inspector was Jewish, and he said a mocking comment. And the inspector, who was Jewish, he says, "You ever say that again, I'm going to make sure no one's going to give you an inspection." Or like it came out like, you don't mock my people. But everyone has their level. But the bottom line is, when a person feels that this is their last connection to their God, they stand up for it. I've shared the story of the Jew in the Holocaust, just one of many, who didn't practice Judaism. He was a very modern and very non-practicing Jew. And when they rounded him up, he says, "You're mistaken. I'm not the guy you're looking for. I'm not part of them. I don't associate with them. I'm not them." But he was on the list. So they took out they went to the synagogue. The SS guards took out a Torah, threw it on the ground, and in front of everyone, they said, if you don't consider yourself part of them, urinate on this. Show us that you don't care. And he says, absolutely not. He said the Shema, and they shot him right there in front of the Torah. The point of these stories, what I'm trying to prove from chapter 19, is what's novel in Judaism is that even a person who never practiced, was never religious, he has a superpower within him of refusing to denounce his Judaism. So while he may be doing things that are not in line with Torah, and he's not religious at all, but if he feels that this would sever his connection from God, at the end of his life, that they say either bow to this idol or I'll kill you, they feel if that's going to sever my connection with God, I'm not going to do it. one of the things we do as Chabadniks, we do what's called mivtzayim. Mivtzayim is we're trying to trigger this love or this light within this neshama of a Jew. One of the times we do it, if some people may have watched on a film we showed from the Rabbi Goes West, from the rabbi in Montana, on Sukkot, we try to have people just to shake the lulav and etrog. It's a very easy mitzvah. It's coming up in less than a month. And we shake the lulav, we shake the etrog. It's a fun mitzvah. It's very easy. And so yeshiva boys would go around Manhattan and they would say, "Here, are you Jewish? Here, shake the lulav, shake the etrog." You do a blessing, it takes 5 seconds, it's done. And one guy was not interested. He says, "No, I'm not Jewish." And he continued. They're like, okay. They didn't think he was Jewish. He came back 10 minutes later from a building that he was working in. He's like, "I am Jewish." Like he couldn't take it that for the past 10 minutes, he told him he's not Jewish and he walked away. He needed to make sure they know he is Jewish, but he's still not going to shake the lulav. So it's not about the point of the observance. It's about that if a Jew feels that they're going to sever their connection with God, they can't do it. And that's really novel within Judaism, that in other religions, you're religious. If you're religious, you're ready to do anything for that faith. But within Judaism, it's not about being religious. It's that you innately have this pure love for God that is hidden. But when your whole Judaism would be questioned, will be threatened, that gets activated. It's just a button that's pressed that you feel if they're going to tell you, if you don't eat this now, I will kill you. If you don't show us that you're not Jewish, I'm going to kill you. A Jew naturally will trigger something inside of them, and they're going to feel they're going to not want to sever their connection and be ready to die, but to keep their connection to God. And like I said before, from Daniel Pearl, it's, in other words, what I want to call this section, there's a spiritual adrenaline that runs through our very veins. It's a surge of power that we don't even realize we have, but when our very relationship with God would be questioned and threatened, a superpower, a super Jew element of us just wakes up. A soul which is feeling faced with disconnecting from God, they have a surge of power. So even if until now they compromised on their Judaism, but that's because they didn't feel that they're severing their connection. They just felt, this is what I understand. They rationalized that it makes sense that I could do this and it's fine. But when they feel that their very relationship with God would be threatened, a person says, if you don't renounce your Judaism, I will kill you. They can't do it, because then they feel, I'm not going to be Jewish anymore. That can't happen. When they're threatened with a spiritual do or die, they would go for the die instead of the do. They wouldn't commit something that would be against God. And this we see so many times throughout history, that they're not practicing and they don't feel that it would be disconnecting them. And the reason why they don't feel it is what the Tanya will call in chapter 19, is because of a ruach shtus, which means it's a spirit of convincing themselves, of rationalization, of foolishness that they feel. Foolishness doesn't mean a petty, it's actually a very sophisticated rationalization. But the words rationalize, it just means rational lies. That you could put a certain rationalization through your mind just to convince yourself that it's not going to separate. In relationships, we see this all the time, that a person doesn't even realize the intent, the extent of what they're doing, but they rationalize that it makes sense. They have to lay out some steam and they'll do this or they'll do that, even though they're lying, and but in their mind it's fine. But if they would really feel that this would mean divorce, they'll be like, no. I love my spouse. Because what they're doing is they've been drawing a line, and they're saying, if I do up until here, it's fine. What does God care if I really do this or if I don't do this? So God drew the line in the Torah, but they're kind of drawing their own line and saying, we decide that even though God says I want this, but I'm sure God wouldn't mind if it goes there, because what difference does it make? And everyone has their line. Of course, there's the Torah lines, but what we end up doing, unfortunately, is we rationalize that it makes sense to do this or to do that, even if it's not drawn up with the lines of Torah. For some, just give you an example, we deal with this all the time. For some, and everyone has their opinion on this, is let's say Halloween. Some people say it's fine to go trick-or-treating. Okay, we're Jewish, but like the friends are not Jewish, we'll just go trick-or-treating. And they can rationalize that, it makes sense. And for some, it's absolutely not. Are you crazy? They would eat pork, but they won't go trick-or-treating. Or for others, it's about having a tree in their home in December. For some, it's like, fine, it's just a cultural thing. For others, you're not, they'll tell their children, you're not allowed to marry someone who has a tree in their home. And for others, what difference does it make? It's inclusive, it's fun, it's cultural. My point is, everyone rationalizes if it makes sense or if it doesn't make sense. But Torah already draws up the line. But what we end up doing is we draw up our own lines. But if an obvious line, if we feel that there's a red line, and that if we cross that red line, we would be disconnected from God. Like in the olden days, it was bowing to idols. Nowadays, it's not a real thing. Like no one has an idol that they're really bowing down. In the olden days, it was this like addiction and temptation. But Jews, they stood strong. Hannah, there is a woman, Hannah, and her 7 sons. For those that are planning to come with us to Israel, whenever that will be, there's we were supposed to go in March and it got postponed because of COVID. But in Tzfat, which is in northern Israel, there is a little tomb, a little cave of a woman, Hannah, who lived during the story of Hanukkah, with the evil Greeks and their king, whose name was Antiochus or Antiochus. He was trying to prove that Jews are ready to give up and to join the Hellenist faith. And there was 7 sons from a widowed woman, her name was Hannah, and he brought them in front of him and they said, bow to this idol or I'll kill you. And the oldest of the sons said, absolutely not. He was the oldest, he was like 14 or bar mitzvah boy, and they killed him in front of his brothers. And they went from son to son, could you imagine, in front of the mother. They killed every one of the children until it was the last child left alive. And the king, this evil king, actually felt bad. Could you imagine the tragedy that's going on? And even to the point that even this wicked king that hated the Jews, was ready to have a little bit of empathy, he took off his ring and he just threw it on the ground. And the ring had an idol on it. And he said, just pick up the ring. It'll look like you're bowing. Just pick up the ring. And this little toddler said no. And they killed him also. Because they felt that we're not doing this. It's going to disconnect me from my God. So the point of the Tanya is there is a spiritual adrenaline that we each possess, this natural love to God, that by hook or by crook, we don't want to be disconnected. And if we feel that that line will be crossed where we would be disconnected, we won't cross it. The reason why we cross so many other lines is because we rationalize that it's okay. God doesn't really care. Well, now, whether that's good or not good, it's irrational. It's a rationalization, but there's another line that if we feel that this would disconnect us, we would never do it. And we would give up everything to make sure that we don't cross that line. But it only comes out, it's only pressed, that button is only pressed when there is a spiritual do or die. So the question we would try to figure out is, now that we know that we have this natural love, what Tanya is going to try to figure out, how could we activate this love to get our emotions on board when we're not faced with the threat of death? So of course, when there's a threat of death, we would do anything. It's almost like you read in the news of a woman who her son or her child was, God forbid, stuck under a car. And like these stories happened where she was able to lift up a car to save her child. So if you read that in the news and you're like, wow, this woman is so strong. You call her up and you say, hey ma'am, I'm asking, I want to figure out, I have a delivery of a washer and dryer arriving today. Do you think you could come to my house and help? And she would be like, are you crazy? I can't lift a washer and dryer. And you would tell her, what are you talking about? I just read in the news. Just yesterday, you lifted a car. And of course, she can't lift the car again. But in a time when her child was stuck there, she had that she had that adrenaline to be able to do it, like a super mom power. And the same is also when we have that threat of our very life, a spiritual connection with God, We have that adrenaline rush, that power surge. But the question is, how do we activate it when we're not faced with that annihilation, when our Judaism is not being threatened? How can we still activate it? And because ultimately, if we could just activate that, we could totally be motivated to serve God. And like we see, God forbid, in those times when no matter what, we were strong and passionate. Like I think I shared the story a couple months ago with a young student in the University of Kansas, by my friend Rabbi Tachtel, where he was Jewish, he had Jewish friends, but he was never involved in his Jewish fraternity. His friends were very involved with the Chabad rabbi, and the Chabad rabbi would go on Shabbos. This was in like 2012, and the rabbi after services would go by and talk to the students of the Jewish fraternity. But this student, he never attended, he never came to the talks. But the rabbi, one Shabbos, he left his talis there, left his prayer shawl behind on the way back from services. And the next day, there was a big anti-Israel and a BDS, a big march, a big rally. It was basically a very anti-Jewish rally. While they covered it up that it's just anti-Israel, but like we see many times on campus, it's very anti-Semitic. And the young Jewish man who was never practicing or anything, he needed to do something. He ran to his fraternity. He got the talis that belonged to the rabbi, and he put it on. It's probably his first time in his life putting on a talis. And he's in the middle of this march. He gets up on a podium or something that was there, and he starts swaying with the talis. Didn't know how to pray or anything, but that was like the picture of the student. The newspaper the next day was a Jewish boy prays in the middle of anti-Israel march. Because when he felt this can't happen, he was ready to do whatever it takes to prove his Jewishness and to stand up. The fact is, let's just put it in simple words, all of us would endure whatever would come our way if it would mean, if the other option would be severing our relationship with God. It's just, we don't feel that it's severing our relationship, therefore we would do whatever. But we would have to denounce our Judaism, we wouldn't. Who would? There's, just in our community, we have a person here who's a paramedic and a firefighter, and Yom Kippur, he was supposed to come to services. He was new, he's never been to Yom Kippur before. This was like 5 years ago, and he's a firefighter, and he had to put in extra hours in October because of fires going up in a couple hours north, and he had to fill in shifts over here. But it was Yom Kippur. He says, what do I do on Yom Kippur? So I said, you fast from this time to this time, and he was like, he never did it before, but he's like, okay, that's what I'm gonna do. And his partner that was riding with him on the ambulance that day, in solitary, he also, in solidarity, he also fasted. But by 1 o'clock, the guy was hungry, so he told the Jewish firefighter, Ryan, he says, come, let's go eat, let's go to Whole Foods, let's just have lunch. And Ryan's like, no, the rabbi told me till 7:26. And he's like, the rabbi won't care, he's like, no, that's what I'm doing, it's for God. And he kept strong. It was an amazing thing because he felt this is my connection right now. And he got this strong surge. They say like Houdini. Does anyone know how Houdini died? It's a crazy story. He hired someone. Obviously everyone knows Houdini, but he hired someone to follow him and to keep his reactions strong. Houdini his father was a Hungarian rabbi. But obviously Houdini had his big act and was very famous. So he hired a guy to follow him, to jump out in the middle of the day and to punch. So it would practice Houdini's reflexes and to make sure he was always ready. And this guy lived in his house, or was in his house. And once he punched him, Houdini wasn't ready and it killed him. So it's almost like maybe we should just hire a guy that's always going to stand there with a gun threatening our Judaism. And then our spiritual adrenaline would be always rushing, would always be activated and triggered. Whenever we're feeling lazy and uninterested in Shabbos or in whatever, then we'll push that button and it'll get ready. So it'll be a visceral reaction. So obviously we don't want that. But what can we do to activate this adrenaline? Okay, so let me stop there for a moment to take some questions. Sorry, I wasn't looking at them. Let's see. Right, Moshe said he's very near to us. Yaakov, we you know, in yeshiva they give punishments for those that are late. And Yaakov, I'm considering you like a yeshiva student with all your Torah study that you do. This is why I get so upset at people when I have asked if they are Jewish and they say my parents were, but I'm not religious. What does that mean? It means that they are Jewish as much as they want to deny or discount it. Exactly. And what they feel is, what does it mean anyway? But if it came to Ava, that's a great point. If it came down to it, and their very being Jewish was going to be taken away from them, they would stand up for it. And that's, we see time and time again in history that people, if they feel that it's lost, they would not allow that to be lost. They would rather give up their life to stay strong. And we see that time and time again throughout Jewish history. And they tried to Jew me. I never heard that. I've gotten in so much trouble for hearing that. I tried to Jew me. Interesting. Okay, I guess that's more, yeah, interesting. I haven't heard about Chana. Powerful. You could check it up on Chabad.org. It's a very scary story, but it's part of the story of Hanukkah. Divine miracle. Yeah. So about Houdini, you can check it up on Wikipedia. I'm sure it will do a better job than explaining than what I'm doing. But the message, the message was that if we're always having someone ready to punch us, if we don't do the mitzvah and we would have to protect ourselves, we would be ready to snap in and have a spiritual adrenaline rush. The question is, we don't have someone always threatening our Judaism. Meaning, let me try to reframe that. If we always had someone walking around behind us and saying, if you don't do that mitzvah, I'm going to kill you, it's going to be, we're going to have a spiritual adrenaline rush, ready to fight to remain Jewish. But we don't have that all the time on our back. So what does it take to have that spiritual adrenaline rush to make sure that we are in the right place, in the right frame of mind, that we could do the mitzvah with motivation, with adrenaline, right? Trying to get our emotions on board without the threat of do or die. So again, just to summarize, the point of what the Alter Rebbe is making here is we have this natural love that in dire circumstances, that natural love that we have for God will come out. And we see that time and time again. But the question is, how do we get that spiritual adrenaline rush, not in a time of dire circumstances when our very Judaism would be threatened, when we have a gun held up against us? Let's see, from Isabel, I've never denied being Jewish, but I have thought I would if I was in a situation with thugs or idiots, if I thought I was in a physical danger. It wouldn't be to me a spiritual situation, but just people mouthing their stupidities. It doesn't work. You're right. We're 3 weeks in the hospital. That's true. But if we go back to the Holocaust, time and time again, people, when they were threatened, and let's just go back even further, in times of Talmud, so many Jews were killed simply because they were forced to bow to idols. And they said, I'm not going to do that. They were forced to do things that they felt would separate them from God, and therefore they weren't ready to do it. You're right, Isabel, that if someone on the streets would say, are you Jewish? And you just say no, you still feel connected to God, and you don't feel that the connection would be severed. But if someone would say something that's so against your morals, let me try to find the right example, because bowing idols is the one I think that the Tanya is going to use. But you're right, nowadays it doesn't seem so real. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about exactly. Maddie feels like you couldn't deny it. So, but you're right. The idea of just on the street denying it, that's either yes or no. But if you would feel that this would sever my connection with God, if I bow to this idol, you wouldn't be able to do it. And even a Jew who was never practicing would be strong and committed to not do it. And that we've seen through history. Are we allowed to stand up for ourselves and our Judaism? So Yaakov's I'm assuming you mean to fight back. It's interesting. Jews were never fighters, but there's actually laws. My kids are learning it because they're learning for international tests of mitzvahs. It's called the chidon. They learn all the mitzvahs in a very kid-friendly way. It's really good stuff. There's actually three laws, three mitzvahs, I should say, within Torah that you have to be ready to give up your life, not to commit those sins. It's called the three cardinal sins. But by everything else, it's better to commit the sin and not to lose your life. Let's say kosher. If you're dying of hunger, you have to eat, even if it's not kosher, rather than die. Or even Shabbos. If someone says, if you don't desecrate Shabbos, I will kill you, you have to be ready to desecrate Shabbos, because that way you could do many more Shabbats. But there's three cardinal sins that in Hebrew the word is yaharog va'al yavar. You have to be ready to die, not to commit the sin rather than commit it. One of them is idolatry. Another one of them is murder, meaning if someone says, if you don't kill that person, I will kill you, a person has to be ready to die and not murder someone. And finally, the third is adultery. If someone says, if you don't marry someone you're not allowed to and sleep with someone, etc., I will kill you, you have to be ready to stand strong and not commit adultery. Those are the three cardinal sins. So we are allowed to stand up. I don't know if that's what you're asking, but certainly we should stand up for our Judaism. But you know what you know the famous joke. What did Jews do when they finally make a fist? We bang our chest and ask for mercy from God. Where we're not really the fighters type. We do have people in our community that they were bullied for being Jewish, and their father said, "You fight back," and they did, and whatever. There's some good stories about it. But we're people of peace. We should stand up for our Judaism. But I think, like what Isabel was saying, if you just walk away, and that's okay, but you don't feel that your Judaism is actually going to be severed. But if it's a situation where you would feel that your Judaism would be severed, you wouldn't be ready to give in. I have an amazing story to share on this, but I don't want to record it. Yeah, how about Maddie? I'll just stop the recording for a second. I'd love to hear. What we see from Tanya, what it does at this point, I'm just trying to give you a walking tour of the next 7 chapters, that the reason why we are able to commit and things that are inappropriate and do things that we know we shouldn't be doing, or maybe even we don't know, but we do them anyway, is because we don't feel that doing this will sever our connection with God. But if push comes to shove, we would feel that this would sever our connection. Like I told you before about bowing to an idol or whatever, we would instantly, a spiritual adrenaline rush would run through our veins and we would be strong. The reason why it doesn't activate itself is because we don't feel we're separated from God's oneness when we commit a sin. So what happens now in chapter 21 and 22, it goes into a deep philosophy about the oneness of God. So it takes the very practical, like the meditation, the Beinoni, the mind over the heart, the impulse control, and now with the activating that innate, latent love that we possess already. But now it goes on to the next few chapters in a very deep philosophy of Kabbalah, of explaining God's oneness in the world. And many people in Tanya during these chapters, they get lost because it's switching between our inner conflict and service and work that's needed, and it's switching to the origins of Creator and how the world came into being. But the purpose of these chapters, just to get you the point before we dig into it, is that we have a latent capacity to endure anything, to be able to hold on to our connection to God. But when does that capacity come out? When does that strength come out? When God's lines are clear and you feel that you can't cross that red line. So the question is, how do we get ourselves to feel that? And that takes a while. But it's easy. We can make an emotional appeal. But what the Alter Rebbe tries to do in these chapters, it tries to philosophically and logically explain it to you, that you have this inner power that you could activate. So emotionally, I could appeal to you and it could take 10 seconds. I could just tell you that if you commit a sin, you're going to be disconnecting yourself from God. Take that. So you're going to be like, no, I don't want to disconnect. But Chabad, literally the word Chabad, means the cognitive intelligence behind something. Delving deep and understanding it so that it's fixed in your mind, that it makes sense to you, that it's not just an emotion, because emotions come and go quite quickly. But if you get something that's figured out, like the times table, you know it in your mind. You just have to pull it out. But to the Alter Rebbe in these few chapters, he tries to make not an emotional appeal, but a logical one. And that's what he's doing in these philosophical chapters, explaining to us about the oneness of God and explaining how everything in the world is one with God. And therefore, when you commit a sin, you're severing a connection with God. So every single mitzvah, in other words, but the Alter Rebbe is trying to explain, every single mitzvah is in effect a do or die situation. It's a very heavy statement. And I'm saying it quickly, but the Alter Rebbe builds it up that every connection, every mitzvah is either a connection with God or a sin is a disconnection with God. It's a deep concept. And usually Chabad, we don't even focus on it. And the truth is both sides of the coin are right. Usually what we focus on is every mitzvah is a world to itself. So you did something wrong yesterday, that was yesterday. Today, focus on what you're doing today. Focus on the good that you have done and that you are doing. Don't let the bad bring you down. Realize that you're always connected. And like the Rebbe would always speak about the Jew that only shows up to Shul and Yom Kippur. That many other people laugh and say, what type of Jew are they? They're just showing up once a year. You think that's how it works? You have to be, it's an everyday tradition. And the Rebbe would say, look how holy they are. That no matter what, Yom Kippur is Yom Kippur. And it's looking at a different perspective. And that's usually the Chabad approach. But Tanya over here, it takes the philosophical route of also seeing that it's not the quantity, it's or the quality of what you're doing. It's just, are you in or are you out? And every mitzvah is connecting you. And every sin is disconnecting you. And it's not only in the time of do or die, really every mitzvah is that circumstance. Every mitzvah is either connecting you or disconnecting you. So it's almost like in marriages, in relationships, you could have a bad day. You could be grumpy. It makes sense. You didn't eat well. You didn't sleep well. Things went wrong at work. But does that give you the right to curse out your spouse? No. Imagine that cursing out your spouse and treating her or treating him wrong and abusive, you can't blame it and say, I'm having a bad day. You would never do that. You're disconnecting yourself from your relationship. And the same is with your relationship with God. Even on a bad day, you don't want to disconnect. It's a heavy statement. And let me just explain a little more, because this chapter itself could have many classes to explain it. The oneness of God, that everything is one with God. And when you're not seeing that oneness, you're believing in other idols. Let me explain that again a little better. There is no absolute existence in the world, period. The only existence is God. It's all part of God. Everything in this world is actually a part of God. It's a great philosophy to have, because everything that happens is actually part of God. So whether you got a job, whether you lost a job, whether you have a lot of money or you don't, whether it's pretty outside or it's not, it's all coming from Hashem. It's an extension of his oneness. And if you don't believe that, if you believe that my boss is really in charge of me and my bank account is what defines me, you have another God other than God's oneness. You have God, but then wait a minute, God, I'll come back to you in a few days. I really got to take care of something. What you're saying is, I have another one providing for me. So of course we have to show up to work, and of course we have to work hard. But ultimately, where is my blessings? Where is my livelihood? Where is it all coming from? It's coming from God. The tricky part is God hides himself. Oh, very good. Like Maddie, like saying the Shema, exactly. God hides himself. But if you look at a snail, the Alter Rebbe, actually, the example we're going to give in chapter 20, the Alter Rebbe quotes, it says an example of a snail. If you're looking at a snail, are you seeing the snail? Or are you seeing the shell of the snail? Really, you're not seeing the snail, you're just seeing the shell. But really, the shell is a part of the snail. So seeing the shell is seeing God, the snail too. So even if things in the world seem to be hiding over God, even that hiddenness, even that hiding is part of God too. It's coming from God. God has different names. We're going to get into it a little bit. Kabbalistically, God has names. Some of the names of God is more revelation of God's light. Some of the names of God are actually concealing God's light. Both are needed. Because if we have too much revelation, if a parent gives too much candy to his kid and doesn't cause structure and allow discipline, you're not doing any favors. So there's names of God that are actually concealing the light. But that's all part of God. It seems like a shell, but it's part of the revelation. Part of so really nothing is holding back, nothing is hiding from God. Everything is an extension of God. So in truth, there's really only two mitzvahs. There's either you believe in the one God, which is the first mitzvah of the Ten Commandments. I believe in one God. Or, and the first negative mitzvah is not to worship other gods. So any mitzvah I'm doing is either pronouncing God's oneness, meaning I have to make an extra dollar, but it's Shabbos, and I say I'm going to close my shop down because God says that He's going to provide for me, and I'm not going to work on Shabbos. There's like these beautiful stories of like people who had to run to the bank, but it was coming close to sundown, and they said, "I'm not going to the bank if it means desecrating Shabbos." And I could understand why a person would run to the bank, because at the end of the day, I need to put this in lest check bounce or something. But where's your, if you believe in God, not that your check won't bounce, but to really believe God runs the world. God wants me to keep Shabbos. It may seem heavy, but every mitzvah, am I doing it pronouncing God's oneness? And if I'm saying, well, there's other things that I care about, it makes sense. I'm not saying it's totally normal, but it's almost saying, God, you're a great guy. I love you and all, but there's also my own wants, and having your own wants makes sense. But at the end of the day, in a relationship, when you tell your spouse, okay, I'll be with you Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, but there's someone else that's very attractive, just give me one day a week and I'll come back to you. That's not a relationship. That's not healthy. The mitzvah is don't have other gods. Every mitzvah you do is affirming your trust and belief in God. And any sin, or whatever God doesn't want you to do, is compromising that oneness and saying, I don't care of what God wants from me. I have my own wants. In short, this chapter is actually telling us a heavy duty statement that, and it definitely we have to dig into it to understand it better, but I'll just summarize it, is that every single mitzvah is actually enhancing your relationship with God, or distancing and hurting your relationship with God. Meaning either you're doing it and you're connecting, or if you committed a sin that you're not supposed to do, you're severing your relationship. So it's not usually what's emphasized in Chabad, but over here, to make his point that you really should feel this adrenaline rush by every mitzvah, not just in a do or die situation, but by every mitzvah, because in truth, every mitzvah is pronouncing your oneness of God, your connection with God, or the opposite. Both are true, both perspectives. The idea that every mitzvah is important and take it one step at a time. We look at Judaism like a ladder. Of course, the goal is to get to the top, but take it one step at a time. We don't look at Judaism as an all or nothing. Well, take it one step. Do Shabbos. Eat kosher one day of the week. That's usually the Chabad mentality. Put tefillin on once a week. Light Shabbos candles and take the next step to make Kiddush. Or invite guests, not now, but in good, healthy times. So we don't emphasize this agenda that every mitzvah is either enhancing or sin is disconnecting your relationship with God. We don't focus on it, but it's still true that there's a oneness of God. It's all encompassing. And if I'm carving out my own desires that are opposite of God, and I make my own bubble and saying, I don't care, this is what I want to do. In effect, what that is, it's a heavy statement, but it's some sort of idolatry. It's saying, yes, there's a God, but there's another God. There's other things and my other wants that are taking priority now. So God is not just, when we're saying other gods and you're bowing to idols, it's other forces that are taking you over. If some people worship the stock market. So there's a God, but there's also a stock market. And I'm putting my trust in the stock market. So that's another interest you have that is taking you over. So the question is God everything, or are there other forces to reckon with? Because if Greeks came to us with a sword and says, either renounce your Judaism and become Greek, or die, Jews would say, I'm never gonna not be Jewish. It's who I am. But if a test comes that it's threatening my Shabbos, a lot of times it's like, okay, don't worry, I'll get around to Shabbos next week. It doesn't seem to be like idol worship. But if you realize the impact that my sin can separate me, it won't let you fall into a trap. You'll be fully in zone. You'll be fully in focused. Okay, we're going to be running out of time. Let me just try to squeeze in, let me just answer some questions. Sorry for the delay. This is great. I love the feedback, everyone. Thank you. Oh, taking Krav Maga last year, and I encourage all of us, the ladies in particular, to learn it. Some sort of self-defense. Cool. Yes, we all need it. I should take it also. Samson is a good example. Samson was the strongest of men, and he was a defender of the Jews. There's even, some of you heard of the Golem in the 1500s, the Maharal of Prague. His name was Rabbi Yehuda Loew. To protect the Jews, he created this figure called the Golem that protected the Jews specifically from blood libels. That was very common in the olden days, and many, many Jews were killed from it. Saying the Shema, that's awesome. Yeah, so the snail analogy, Maddie, is going to come from Tanya. I can't take the credit for that. Hashem made everything out of his very essence, thus meaning we're never really disconnected from him. Example is we breathe. Awesome. I started class last year at school, but then in March, I continued online. Awesome, great. Well, thank you, everyone. We're going to end with that for today. Definitely a lot more to learn, and God willing, next week we'll dig into chapter 18 and see this method of trying to activate the spiritual adrenaline rush, where we will get our emotions congruent and on board, and get our behaviors to come naturally as well. Have a great end to your week, and look for that love inside of you. All the best, everyone.